One.
There are currently 0,
She already
and
told me.
I am pushing the button now. So it is 5 o'clock and you are live.
Well, welcome to this meeting of the Legislative Committee. Calling this to order, and do you want to call the roll?
Sure. Councilmember Rafter,
Here.
Councilmember Murphy,
Here.
Councilmember Risberger,
Here.
Councilmember LaParshu.
Here.
The first order of business, number 3, now after the first 2, the approval of the minutes, August 9. Any revisions or comments?
Man.
Seem acceptable?
No, they were acceptable.
Yeah, they look good.
Yeah,
Just trying to think.
they look good.
Okay. So we can approve that.
Yes.
Luke?
I second it.
Well, you don't have to second it, but just say where you stand. Now we have public comment time.
I'm Daniel Lappin, Chair of the City's Planning Commission. Here today to listen to deliberations on the MU1 code and to get an understanding of how the council would like to proceed through the secret process related to the adoption of the MU1 zoning code provisions. I'm going to answer any questions about the commission, the planning commission.
All right. We have only 2 items on the agenda, the MU1 zoning code update and also residency requirements for boards and commissions. I'm asking you, given how long things are going to take, is there an order we can take things in, or should we stay to this order? For example, what do we mean by, what is the update going to consist of?
Final draft. I would suggest keeping this order, John,
Sure.
because I think the deliberation is going to be more over B than A. So,
Okay, let's talk about zoning code update.
Well, I think I'll just toss it right over to Stephen. I mean, he's done all the work on that. Well, I shouldn't say all the work. The planning commission's done a lot of work with Stephen on this, but he's put a lot of effort into developing this code update, which I think makes a lot of sense. I think it's the right approach for the city to take to our MU1, which is a downtown area. And yeah, I think we went over this was a couple months ago now. Initially, there weren't a whole lot of questions. I think the legislative committee had asked us to have Dave Merzig take a look at it. He doesn't have any concerns. There's been a few changes that Stephen can kind of go through and maybe point us in a certain direction, look at a few key areas. We're not going to go through page by page. Obviously, if there are any questions, if anyone's had a chance to read it through and has specific questions, we can talk about those. But maybe Stephen, you want to give us an overview of what you've done since the last time we talked about it?
Yeah, so the last time we talked about it, there were some questions about building heights along Market Street. An update to that was we essentially created a method to build additional stories if you complied with LEED certification. So essentially what you're doing is for each level of LEED that you achieve, you're adding like a bonus story. So the intent of that is that one of our comprehensive planning goals is to encourage green and environmentally sound construction and sustainability methods. So what that'll allow you to do is, as a developer, you can add those stories if you're meeting one of our comprehensive plan goals, which is to add additional environmental and green infrastructure. So we gain the stories to a maximum story of, I believe, 8 in exchange for those LEED certifications. To keep in mind, like Lofts on Dietz is a LEED certified building, so a project like that would have been eligible for, bonus stories under this kind of framework. So it's not something that's entirely unachievable or something that a developer wouldn't do. It just is slightly more costly. There were some questions for Dave Merzig about the planning commission versus the zoning board and how those interface. Dave Merzig confirmed that the planning commission can provide written opinions to the zoning board on tasks and variances and interpretations that are under review. He didn't have a problem with that. He said it was totally fine. He was willing to put that in writing if we wanted to, or you could discuss with him. A couple things to note in this code. It's large, but it addresses a lot of things that we currently don't address within our code. So like, we don't really have a landscaping requirement in our current code. This code builds into development projects, kind of street tree requirements, landscaping requirements, lighting requirements, things that our current code just kind of leaves up to the whim of, you know, whoever decides to build. The other thing, the zoning map has a couple changes, the actual footprint of the MU1 code, like MU1 district. Essentially what it does is it runs up to the backside of Walnut Street. So what we're doing is we're taking like buildings like the YMCA, we're taking St. Mary's School building, moves into the MU1. We essentially add some buildings that probably should have been within that footprint to begin with, but we're not. There's a parcel on Market Street that's zoned commercial. It's kind of just this random commercial parcel that's being added. So it kind of just cleans up our zoning boundaries a little bit. So there's not a ton of change there, a couple parcels. And then if you look, I know it's kind of not how we've traditionally done zoning, but so in the MU1 zone, if you look on the kind of the zoning descriptions for these different transects, you've got the MU1 zone as a whole, which is like a large kind of our downtown area. Within that larger zoning region, you've got three kind of distinct areas. We have like our downtown Main Street, which is like kind of our condensed brick, you know, right to the sidewalk, you know, right to the, and I included little pictures there if you look at the descriptions. Then you've got a T5 zone, which is kind of like Market Street, where you see like more like the Green Earth building. You see kind of independent, non-connected buildings that are kind of, you know, 1-2 stories, kind of a mix of different massings. And then you have like, I included Wilbur Mansion because I think if you look at like the street, like up Ford, you see places like Wilbur Mansion, you see like traditionally like single family type homes that have been converted into different uses. So within that MU1 zone, you have three very distinct types of neighborhoods. Like it's not just one homogeneous blob. So what the zoning code attempts to do is regulate the zoning within those kind of independent neighborhoods so that each one develops in its own way, instead of trying to force everything to be that kind of bricks to the sidewalk, you know, very dense downtown model. So what you do with a transit code is you kind of reflect each of those kind of uniquenesses within those kind of subzones, instead of trying to just homogenously zone one, you know, 25-acre parcel that is very different depending on where you're standing. So that's kind of that in a nutshell. So it's similar to a traditional zoning map in that if you own a building in the MU1 zone, you look at the map and you identify where your parcel is located. Is it located in a T6? Is it located in a T5? Is it located in a T4? And from there, that's the section of code that you would be applying to your building in regards to height, setback, and kind of how it's masked.
So the only question I have with regard to the properties that have been included is the block, and I see why, but the block, the north-ish most block on Dietz between Reynolds and Walnut is mostly residential. So it just seems kind of out of place with the transects that you described.
So if you go that far up Dietz, what you end up with is oh, cold, sorry. It's not COVID. If you go up that street, You have Petrobono's Funeral Home,
Mhm.
which is not residential.
Right,
You have two kind of office suite buildings. You have Fred Ploutz's building that was given a use variance to be run as a hotel.
okay,
So really the only single family home on that section is like Chip and Stephanie Holmes' house.
right. Does it include the whole block over to Church?
No,
Oh, okay, so then
No.
I just misinterpreted.
yeah,
It's
yeah.
just that
It's just
side of the
those
street.
houses that kind of are all, I mean, like I said, there's one house that's still being used as like a single family
Right,
residence.
okay, yeah, if it's not the whole block, I was taking the whole block into account, okay.
No, yeah, like I said, I think we only had maybe a small handful of single family homes that were pulled in. Because most of what we included are either being used commercially or are already, 3-family apartment houses.
I said that's the only one on that whole block, when you think about it,
Yeah,
yeah.
So is Chip and Stephanie Holmes' house included in this strictly for uniformity's sake then? Because of, I don't want to say straight line across here, but you basically incorporated everything behind the Walnut Street homes right to there. I mean, was there a reason why the line didn't scoot down here instead of
So-
going that way?
the intent of drawing a zoning map like this, is it to like really kind of like grab or leave out certain parcels? It's kind of supposed to reflect like what our future land use map is. The way I see that area developing, I see Walnut Street as kind of being I don't want to call it a line in the sand, but like a clearly defined, it's a historic district. It has a very specific type of architectural change from what we see on these other streets.
Mhm.
Walnut becomes a very clear, like definitively what I would call kind of a break from what that street pattern is of Dietz. What it's not doing, it's not saying that that house has to be turned into anything. It can always be a single family
Right.
home. Just based on what's being done in that area and what the uses are we see there, it wouldn't make sense to just swoop in and exclude a parcel just because it happens to be a single family home.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah, I think that makes sense, what you're saying about Walnut Street, because on the other side of it, all those houses, they're either apartments or single family homes, I mean, all of them.
Right.
And then on this side, we can identify one.
Right.
So,
we see one single family home and then we see a lot of commercial uses around it.
right,
So I don't want to say it's a gain or a loss, but what it represents is that within that area, we don't see an overwhelming presence of single family homes being used as single family homes. Not to say they couldn't be, it's just where we're at right now. That's not what we see being done there.
Just a comment, I just wanted to say I really appreciate how you folks have all really stuck to the strategic plan and even the innovation and kind of getting extra lead standards in as a little bit of an extra. If folks want to continue to build upwards, I appreciate the creativity.
Yeah, it's actually a tool that's kind of being used in a lot of municipalities to encourage that type of development. And I think for us, it works very well because we have a section of undeveloped land that could utilize, adding height down there isn't going to impact our main street in any negative way.
Stephen, first again, I want to say you've done an excellent job on this and I put a ton of work into it and it's definitely a step forward. And I want to thank Danny and the Planning Commission because I know they put a lot of time into this as well. I haven't looked at it since it first came out. I imagine there's a number of changes to it. And so my concern may have already been addressed, but most people, the average person, uses the zoning code to look up what they're allowed to do on their property, what their setback can be, or, those type of simple things. And currently, they pretty much avoid all of the narrative and just go right to the bulk and use table and there are their answer. My concern on this is that when I first saw it, I mean, I don't know where the bulk and use tables, are they going to still exist for this zone or we're getting rid of them. But my first reaction is it was very complicated for the simple user, somebody who just wants to look up, what am I allowed to do? Or what's my setback? that it wasn't as simple to find that. It was just, 100 pages of narrative to try and figure that out.
Oh, yeah.
So what I've worked on for that is basically, if you go through this code, and I know like, because it's in a big chunk right here, it's overwhelming. But what I'm gonna do, I think, is make an appendix of basically just like a flow chart process of how this works, as well as all the kind of setback, bulk and use stuff as an attachment. It's all in that code, but we can just set it aside as an attachment. So you can be like, I'm in a T4 and you can go right to it. So Dave, if you scroll like, yeah, just go through that. If you go to the section called the regulating plan, there's a chart right there that shows
This one?
yeah. And that kind of shows you, like, if you go to like a T3, it says these are your setbacks, these are your heights. And then there's also illustrated representations of all this if you keep scrolling down, like right there. So you get into those kind of illustrated. But I think that, like you said, putting that as a separate table is basically, these are the setbacks, these are the bulk and use table. Instead of going with like a traditional kind of like what we have now, which is a giant table of coffee shop, laundromat, the bulk and use table has been reworked into just using the New York State Building Code uses. So if an engineer or an architect designs a building, they go through the New York State Code and they say, I'm going to build what's called an assembly. So that category, assembly, under the New York State Code lists a ton of different uses, like examples of what is an assembly. What we're saying with this code is that we're going to regulate based on the New York State Building Code instead of coming up with our own bulk and use table of our own examples. So that when a developer or someone that wants to do something hires an engineer or architect, they know they're already familiar with how those processes work. And if you go to the use section of the code, you're basically able to do anything you want in the downtown zone because of that, because we allow that flexibility of use instead of being like, you can only build a laundromat, you can build a laundromat, but you can't build a clothes washing facility because that's not specifically listed. We get away from prohibiting specific uses because we forgot to put them on a table. So
What is currently prohibited in downtown that would not be prohibited when this is adopted?
So that's the interesting thing. Our code says if we don't specifically put it on a chart, it's prohibited. So any use that someone comes to me and says, hey, I'd like to do X, Y, or Z, if it's not written specifically on the chart, I have to be like, we need a use variance.
So like right now, there are some things that you can't do downtown, like for lack of a better word, an adult shop. Would that be now permitted?
No, so you wouldn't be, so we do restrict some uses. They're specifically listed as restricted. But it's kind of a reverse. We list what we want to restrict. We leave open what someone might come to.
There's a chart listing restricted uses.
So we move away from restricting uses because we forgot to write it down.
So Stephen, is this ready to go? So in other words, if the council says, we're good with this, the next step was probably to send it off to the county, I imagine.
Yes, so we'd have to do a 239M. We would have to do some sort of seeker
Is
process.
this in its final form, ready for seeker and county review? And
Yes.
I thought you said appendices needed to be created still.
So all that material is already in the code. It's already written. It's already in front of you. It's just if we had someone come in and say, how do I use this code? We basically make like a cheat sheet of the material that's already here. We wouldn't be adding content.
More like a guidance document.
Some places just have like a flow chart describing what they do. So it's on the city website if you wish to build a project in the city of Oneonta to downtown. Step one, do this, step two, do that, so on, and then it goes through. And then it can show like an example of the schematic drawing your drawing meets these schematics, you know.
Yeah,
The process, though, as far as going to the county, does it go to the county from this committee, or does it go to the county after the council votes on it?
Well, I think it would be a mistake to have the council vote on it, then send it to the county, and the
Yeah.
county may request changes.
That's what I was thinking.
And then you'd have to go through it all over again. So I would send it to the county first. My recollection, we've done this before, is they can ask for changes. We can either make those changes. If we don't, we may need a super majority in order to pass.
That's great.
All right?
Yes.
But I mean,
Still have a
I
little
do,
memory left.
I feel pretty good about this particular document. I mean, I've worked on it. The planning commission, who includes a member of the county planning office, has worked on this. I mean, I don't see why the county would have any issue with what we're doing, so.
In the past, they've not have an issue with it. They've actually made some additions to suggestions to make it an even better document.
They did that with the comprehensive plan I wrote for another town in the county. They were approved, they said it was fine, but they recommended a few changes.
Yeah, they've been helpful.
So we could theoretically send this to the county this week.
Correct.
Get that clock ticking anyway. I think it's 30 days they have to review.
if I'm hearing correctly, this is a very impressive plan. And if we say nothing to be modified, then it would go to the county. Okay, just want to clear this up. The county after us would review it, add questions, recommendations, anything they may want to do. We could then consider that again, or however we want to deal with it. And then the council would vote on it, and that would be the end of it.
You would have to do a secret review on the MU one, because that's kind of another reason why I was here. I figured that it'd be, well, we could figure out a way to coordinate, and if council wants to do the review, then we can discuss in commission, during the planning commission, and come up with a statement. But then there is this type, the action has to be classified, and the EAF has to be prepared by the city. Since the city is.
Well, the council could delegate the secret to the planning commission
Either way, yeah.
if they wanted to.
I'm just here to figure out how. to be
So-
helpful.
I think that based on the amount of time the planning commission has already put into this, we have already had many public hearings about this topic. We've already taken public comment about this topic during the planning commission. I think it would make sense to have the planning commission do the seeker and just provide it to the council. Because we've already essentially worked through all of the seeker process within the planning commission. That way the council can then essentially review the final documents and then.
Case through adoption. Then the commission would recommend adoption pending council deliberation. Council vote.
But still, I believe, need a public hearing before it could be signed.
That's correct, yeah, so it would have, the secret review would take place since it's a type 1 action. And then we would issue a secret determination and then refer it to the council with our recommendation. The council will have a public hearing.
Actually, I think this is more like an ordinance, and the council would approve it and then be a public hearing prior to me signing it. I could be wrong, but
Yeah.
I think it's handled like an ordinance.
Would Wednesday be too early to deal with this at the planning commission?
We can put it on the agenda and start, we can definitely start the secret review process and we'll start moving it along. And the EAF would just take a second to prepare, so I would just do it in the EAF mapper, but then you just have a description of what you're trying to do. It's the only thing it would take.
Any ideas about the timelines for, from, it'll leave here and then get it up to the county?
Yep,
How long do you reckon they'll take?
they have up to 30 days.
Okay, would that have any effect on conducting a seeker during that time or before they even take a peek? Okay,
Yeah, those can be simultaneous.
so we can clear it through this committee and it'll move to the next stage.
Right.
Okay, so this may not be anything, it's not anything that would hold me up from saying, that this should go forward, but it's something that I brought up to Stephen, and I just wanted to ask about, especially since I'm seeing the transects described so clearly, with regard to the air conditioning units on Main Street. I have now noticed like several of them that are kind of wonky and a little scary. And I just like walk my toddler around them. And I'm sure that it's very rare that they would fall out, but I just want to talk about what everyone's thoughts are, what your thoughts are on restricting them directly above public walkways. If that's something we can do, if you guys think that's worth doing.
I mean, some of these buildings, because they don't have central mechanicals, if you restrict air condition, I mean, it's more of a maintenance issue, I would say, than a zoning issue.
Okay.
This new code requires that mechanicals, like air conditioning units, like large mechanicals be shielded or concealed from the public right of way. Something like that, those aren't really permanent. I mean, they're considered like a, temporary, appliance.
Mhm.
I think that's something we could address through like maintenance, a maintenance ordinance or some sort of, but like, I think it would be very difficult to like restrict room AC units in the zoning code, just because you would have people that essentially would then not have air conditioning,
Right.
which you could do. I mean, I've lived without air conditioning before.
Well, Stephen, in your experience with air conditioning units, is there something that's out there that can be purchased that would prevent an accident of something
Well,
like that?
they're supposed to be like screwed into the windowsill, like they're supposed to be mounted.
Right.
So a lot of people just wedge them between the windows, and that's why they dump forward like that. So they're not being, typically what's happening, they're just not being mounted correctly.
Is something as simple as requiring it to be screwed in, is that in our code currently?
Yeah, we can, I mean, we dealt with the one that Katie sent last week by just simply contacting the landlord and saying, hey,
Yeah,
you have a condition that could theoretically be dangerous. Can you please address it?
and they were really responsive.
But
That
is it
particular one.
actually written in the code though, to require?
So we default back to like, most of what's in the mechanical code is manufacturer specification. The manufacturer says how that unit's supposed to be installed. We just fall back on that and say, Whirlpool, who makes this appliance, says it's supposed to be screwed in this way with these bolts, with these. You don't do that, technically you're violating the manufacturer's code, which is then violating like the New York State Mechanical Code.
Okay,
So that's the enforcement mechanism, is we're like, you're violating the code because you're not installing the appliance correctly. Just like if you vented a hot water heater into your bathroom. In any other weird setup someone might come up with.
Getting back to this item, do we want to permit it to go forward?
Yes.
I move that we move it forward.
Sure. I agree.
Should we officially take an official vote through the committee? Or something like that?
I don't know that whether committees usually vote, but I'm fine with it. Let's just check with people. Luke?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes,
Yes.
cool. Thanks.
Thanks for your work.
Good. And this other item with the air conditioning, satisfied with that there's, we're taking active steps to prevent an air conditioning from flipping down and hurting someone, or not hurting someone, just flipping down and scaring the heck out of everybody.
Right.
Squared away, Steve? You can,
Yeah, I mean, if you just send, just send me addresses.
all right. With that, we'll move on to the next item, residency requirements for boards and commissions. We talked about this a month ago. A lot of things came up. I guess in my recollection, from my notes, this the origin of this discussion goes back to a council meeting where we were approving membership on two committees, the Arts and the Housing Committee or Commission. And that in the first round of nominations, a person who did not reside in the city was given approval by an exception from the council. The next person, there was a debate about it, and the person was not getting approved, and that kind of left us with discussions about the consistency of this became really a question. Did the code restrict us to residents of the city to be on committees? And partly this evolved, as I recollect it, to be maybe, but the issue might be more along the lines of some of our committees or boards have authority that does not need approval and cannot be protested or limited by the council. This is the case. And so the options for some of this included, let's just settle it. No one can be a member of the commission, any committee or commission or board, unless they're a member of the city. We have voted at least twice to make an exception to that, one with the airport, the other with the, well, actually with the other two. And so I don't know if anyone want to go back and just legislate or require limiting membership on these committees to residents of the city. It also came up that some of the committees are clearly advisory committees, as it's described in the code, in the charter. But others have this authority, and we talk about that as being a distinction, because if one of the committees is advisory in nature, if I'm saying this correctly, if the committee's advisory in nature, we certainly would want to have qualified people. The more someone knew about something, it's arguable to permit a person, 2 people, I don't know, on that committee to improve ostensibly the advice we were receiving. And that in the other kind of a committee, it should be restricted to residents of the city, because these are non-elected officials. And we should be careful about giving people who aren't residing in the city the ability to make zoning decisions for the city, or even planning decisions, et cetera. Relieving someone who's protesting their water bill for a decision made by someone who doesn't reside in the city or pay for the same resource. So with that, that's kind of where we are. I believe, Dave, I don't want to put it in your mouth, but I think Dave, you said we ought to talk about what our various committees are indeed there for, and what kind of powers, if any, do they have. So that might be a place to start, but I'll turn it over now to the other members of the committee. Or anyone else.
So that's the approach. You want to go one by one, boards and commissions, and define their.
I don't know, David, does that conform with what you were thinking?
I wouldn't want to spend an awful lot of time going through every single board and commission defining what they do, because I think it's pretty clear which ones have authority and which ones are advisory. Of course, I don't have the list in front of me, so that's what I've been looking for. But Carrie's told me that it's been migrated over to the new website, so she's trying to bring that up for me. But I just wouldn't want to get hung up on that section too long. I think it really comes down to, I mean, the debate is going to be how important is it to have residents on these two boards, and how much does it matter to each one of us? I think we can clearly group them into two groups and then make a decision. Do we want
Hmm.
both of them one way? And that could be this way or this way, or do we want to split it?
With the exception of the two new commissions, I think the charter defines which ones have authority by saying which ones are officers.
Yeah. Of course, I don't have that with me either, so.
Prepared today.
Board of Public
Hey, hey,
Service, ZBA, planning, assessment, and civil service are city officers now.
Can you say that one more time?
Board of Public Service,
Mhm.
Planning Commission, Zoning Board of Appeals.
Yep.
Or it was called Board of Assessment Review,
Mhm.
Gary,
Yes.
and Civil Service Commission.
And Greg, those are
What
all,
about-
oh, sorry, go ahead, Doug.
And arts currently,
Arts has power.
Neither one of them are currently classified by charter.
As having being officers appointed.
I couldn't hear what,
The two new commissions, no changes were made to the charter as far as designating them as officers.
right. But there is a power the Arts Commission has. If we approve the strategic plan, then we can't do anything to, yeah,
Sure. So if I could just ask a question, because it seems like the hangup with the Arts Commission, let me just say we got there because we agreed as a group that we didn't want to spend council's time approving or denying and getting hung up in arguments around something subjective that we have no experience in. And so we elected to give them that authority, but what I'm understanding is that the hangup is around the process for aggrieving a decision of the Arts Commission through Article 78. If that was removed, and if there is a way to remove it, would that just,
No, I don't think that's the issue, Kate. I think it's what you just described, that they have the ability to make subjective decisions. And I think the definition is that if you can make subjective decisions that affect the people of the city.
but and also based on what Gary said, since they're kind of in limbo, even though they behave like officers or a commission with officers, they're not in the charter at all
Well,
yet
to
because they're
make it
brand
even
new.
more confusing is that our current practice, despite what the charter says, is to treat everybody as an officer on every board and commission. We have everybody sign the book and take the
Right.
oath, which is only required of officers. That, I think, is just faulty practice over the years.
That's easily fixed, though. I
Yeah,
think.
so I can tell you, I sat in on the Arts Commission. Greg was there for part of the time. And they are definitely moving forward with the understanding that they will be having the authority to approve and disapprove. And they're talking about the processes that they will use to do so.
Do we want to start this then by solving the basic problem about the Arts Commission? If we're still in favor of how we defined it, then maybe we need to put it into the charter so it fits into one of the two categories in the charter. And that way we're defining them as officers.
Could you just make the review pending council's approval of their decision?
yeah, like they approve
So
it and then
become
it
an-
comes to
become an
council?
advisory commission that would then be restricted by the common council, essentially approving their recommendation.
Yeah,
then it
which is
takes
what
the-
Parks is supposed to be too.
But it takes their authority away, and the whole reason we wanted to give them the authority is what you said. We don't want to be dictating what's art in here.
But to your point, if the issue is that we don't want to give people that authority, then oversight is the simple solution.
It creates it creates essentially a process so that the city officials that are elected by the city citizenry ultimately make the determination, not the art commission. So the art commission could still provide you with the
Mhm.
expertise, but the city council, which represents the citizenry of Oneonta, would still have the voice to say, despite that expertise, we object.
Well,
And you're suggesting that they go through the approval denial process, but before it's finalized, the council votes as like a secondary.
And it also alleviates some of that Article 78 situation.
so what we're talking about is changing it from what we already made to an advisory committee.
Yes.
I feel like it would be easy enough without changing their operating practice. It would
But-
just add a step,
But
a
it-
layer of
But
protection.
but it still brings it back to what we are trying not to do, which is making us be approving
We would be,
arts.
but we would be voting on it rather than vetting people. We wouldn't have artists come to the common council and put a proposal in our lap and say, I want to put, X, Y, Z, and then, it would just be yes or no at that point.
But ultimately, we'd still be making the
Oh,
decision.
totally.
Like, I mean, I could go either way on this, but this could be a slippery slope.
I,
So,
Do you want to be making subjective decisions about what art is appropriate and what art is not appropriate? You start to get into some potentially difficult areas.
oh, yeah.
this commission, the Arts Commission, is essentially making recommendations about what to do with city property.
Right, so they're supposed to put forward a plan, an overall plan of art in the city. Here's what the types of things that we would like to see and where we would like to see them to council for approval at a broad level. And then once that is approved, they will work on executing that plan, right? Calling for submissions for these objectives, and then they will vet what they think fits the scope best. And then, so right now, they will say, yes, Danny, we like your idea for a mural that we called for. You're approved, get painting. But we could have them say, yes, we like your thing. We're gonna put it forward to council. They will, whatever, they'll vote to approve or deny. That's an option.
Mhm.
It just maybe the council could have veto authority,
But that's essentially, yeah.
Make it
It's the same thing.
I think there was
Right.
something in Syracuse where the mayor had vetoed a mural and then the council overrode the veto, I think.
Yeah.
For a particular mural, but I think maybe the arts commission could have a written decision outlining the reasons for, approving. And then that like gives the council a basis on, expert opinion on the particular application in front of it, so they don't just say, we approve, here you go, and then you have to relitigate the whole thing.
You would end up with findings, just like you would for a planning commission site plan review or zoning, or
Right.
like you would provide findings to the council, who would then review those findings prepared by your commission. And using that, they can approve or deny.
Yeah, chances are, I mean, if, you look at the findings before the meeting, that it would be more of an expeditious review.
Well, here's my question. It says in the law establishing, or the ordinance establishing the Public Arts Commission, that if you are denied, that they'll provide within writing, within 30 days, their reason for denying it.
Right.
So, I mean, at that point, could council be brought in with some sort of veto, overrule?
Katie, I'm starting to wonder if we're making all of these changes just to avoid the commission from being officers and not being able, and maybe we're just getting too hung up on this whole issue of who's officers and who's not, and just go with what we've had all along, is that members of all boards and commissions should be members of the residents of the city. The council can waive that under unusual circumstances.
Right.
I mean, are we getting too hung up on this?
Because the issue currently, Gary, and correct me if I'm wrong, is it doesn't say it necessarily with
It's
all
not
the boards
clear.
and commissions. It's not
It's not
clear.
clear.
Is that true?
I mean, it does say the mayor shall appoint residents of the city to boards and commissions
Yes.
under the mayor's
Yes.
duties.
And then in other places, it talks about waivers. And
Right.
I don't know. I don't recall.
Really? I haven't read that.
I don't recall
It's
exactly.
even
I know
unclear.
going through it, it's not I think the issue was, Katie, that it said, talks about all officers must be residents. It says,
Yes.
Oh,
and then
that's
it
right.
talks about which ones of the boards and commissions are officers. So that seems to imply that the ones that are not, but I don't know, but maybe just clarify what we've got and not get too hung up on it. Because you know what, it really gets even more complicated if we really want to start digging into this. There's no end to it. The council approves the appointment of many committees that have real authorities that you delegate to them. And we don't make them officers. For example, the micro enterprise program. You delegate the authority to a committee to select who gets grants and who doesn't. And we don't make them officers. The Downtown Improvement Fund Selection Committee was another example. I think everybody was a resident on that, but it's still, we didn't call them officers. But so it's, if you really start diving into this, it gets pretty complicated.
Right. And I think what we're trying to do is establish a clear line of thinking for who gets approved to boards and commissions and who doesn't, which doesn't really allow for flexibility, which is fine. But I think that, you know, like you said, Mayor, if it's something where everybody, where we agree, we put in the charter that everybody should be a city resident unless there are circumstances, and then allow the council at the time who's voting to be able to make a determination based on what they think is best, just like we did.
Basically, we're talking about solidifying something that we already do currently. So
Or changing it.
I mean, I would, looking at the change in the population of the city, I think it's gotten much more difficult finding people to fill these positions. I would be of the mindset to do exactly what Katie was saying is, and Gary is saying, is we keep it city residents unless we have somebody that is not, and then and we either approve them or we don't approve them.
Right.
If five council members feel that this person is worth being on the council despite being a city resident, so be it.
Right.
That makes sense to me.
Sometimes we need real experts in areas of difficulty that our different boards and commissions deal with, and we don't always have the experts downtown, unfortunately.
So at some point, this is going to have to be, we have 10 minutes or so. This is something that we wanted to deal with in terms of, I think, changing something, documenting something about how the council will operate in the future, which would be something we'd vote on in the council. Put that forward. We don't have a proposal at this point. Some ideas being floated, which are fine. And I think going back to the origin of this, I think they're very, there's some very specific events that occurred in this room. Some about a year plus ago, the Airport Commission argued or requested that not a non-resident could be on the Airport Commission because managing an airport, which was in fact what they were doing, required people who paid attention to that, had expertise, et cetera. And that passed uniquely, I think, and was written into the charter as something that would be permitted. The Airport Commission has a special description permitting a person not on that committee. The second event occurred in a meeting here where one non-resident was approved, another non-resident was not approved. And then another 2 weeks or so from that, there was a decision to, again, voted on by the council to turn that back. And so we have an inconsistency that might be worth addressing, where we could, just keep the kind of flexibility we're talking about, with full knowledge that with 5 people say yes to a particular person, we could make an exception, but whether rationales for that, it may look a little odd that individuals are coming to a vote. And we'd have to talk more about their bona fide qualifications and how those qualifications could not be met by finding anyone else in the city with similar abilities. And it's just, in a public discussion leading to that vote, how do we talk about, I approve one, but I won't approve another?
Right, well, I think you raise a really good point, John, which is the individual thought of, like, why you wouldn't do that. I mean, every person around this table is gonna have a different reason. I think the challenge that you just put in front of us is realistic, is that, like, why would we approve someone who doesn't live in the city? How do we define those qualifications to say that no single person in the city it meets similar qualifications and is interested? Could we argue that the mayor exhausted all his resources and this is the only person who could do it?
In some part of this, there are distinctions. People on zoning are required to have X number of hours of training that occur in their first year, and then throughout their tenure on the commission. So, the board. I think planning has a training requirement. Danny, I'll ask you about that.
That's correct, yeah. I think commissioners have to have a certain number of continuing education hours.
Yeah.
And that's something that I haven't brought up lately, but I can bring up, kind of a board member. I'm the board member of the New York Planning Federation, so it's pretty easy to get trainings now through them, probably.
Oh, that's fine. I mean, but there is a requirement.
So hopefully I have some commissioners to attend trainings, and particularly in light of the recent Hill Solar project, we probably want to start attending trainings on how to review those facilities.
There may be other examples, but I
So
point
the
out
commission does
that when you're trying to put a commission together or a board together, you can't assume that Joe Harvey knows a lot about zoning.
Yeah, so
And they have to go through some serious training to become familiar with the terminologies, the powers, et cetera.
Yeah.
And then we could be providing that as we could be providing planning. It doesn't have to be going out and paying.
Yeah,
for it.
so it should be like part of, perhaps being on a commission, there should be an expectation to have, an avenue for continuing education, no matter where you are. Because if you're making decisions, the field you're on, which you're making decisions is evolving continually. And it'd be good to make sure that the commissioner's understandings evolve concurrently.
Let's also keep in mind that every decision that council makes is subjective to some extent. I mean, and based upon each individual's opinion and perspective and background. And I mean, nothing is really, and it's supposed to be that way. I mean, look at appointments to the federal Supreme Court. I mean, they're subjective, whether they're approved or not. So, I mean, I don't know that it's even desirable to get away from the subjectivity, because that's what it's supposed to be about.
Well, the
People's
difference being
opinions.
that each member of the council has been elected by citizens in their ward, whether or not that people know them very well, or there's a glowing report floating around, but we are elected. So there is a democratic balance to this whole thing. As far as boards are concerned, people are named, and they're not being elected by us, they're being approved by us. They're being selected or nominated by you and or the mayor, and we basically do it. The only objections I've ever heard to a person being nominated had to do with residency. They are or are not residents of the city. And that was where the lack of clarification or the issue was. And I think it's different than saying subjectivity reigns. It reigns in all human endeavors, but sometimes there are checks and balances.
I can recall other no votes, not often, but I can recall some other no votes
Oh, yeah.
On nominees, but not all.
Yeah, I can't, I just can't, but that's an interesting question, whether simply saying no is enough, and that is for a council member. So I think we're pretty close. But we need to have something written up.
So what's the action plan, John?
Who writes this stuff up? The city attorney. And what do we want the city attorney to try to incorporate into the document?
Well, are we in agreement first that we want to require all boards and commission members to be residents of the city, but also allow for waivers depending on circumstance? And if we're all in agreement on that, then we can put something together and send it to Mr. Merzig, who will put together a proper motion.
Do you
for
think
discussion.
that would satisfy people on zoning commission for the zoning board to be non-residents of the city to make zoning decisions for the city?
Well, the only reason they would be non-residents is if the council votes on a waiver for it. One at a time.
Does that make sense?
Well,
We can waive a lot of things, but there was a thing about people have to be residents of the city. I'm just trying to figure out how far we can go as a council, given the rights.
okay, so
and
it
the impacts
sounds like we're not in agreement.
Okay, we can bring this
Or
up again later.
you don't, I don't know how Luke feels. I don't know how Katie feels, but it sounds like you do not agree with that statement.
No,
So I would bring it back to Katie
yeah,
and I'd bring it
you're
back
right.
to
We
Luke.
don't have, I don't think we have time now to clarify what our position is and what we're seeking.
Well, I still haven't heard from Luke. So,
Okay.
I mean, I'd like to hear from Luke if he's got anything to add, and same with Katie on it.
I wasn't trying to suppress Luke, you were talking, and I was.
I didn't
talking.
say that you were trying to.
Okay,
Okay, let's let Luke do Luke. Then. I agree with a lot of what Dave said, and what has been said in regards to if we feel somebody does have the authority, does have the expertise, experience that could make the city a better place, I think we'd be doing a disservice if we did not nominate them based on if they lived 5 feet outside of the city's borders. I think that we're elected based on our decision-making, our vision for the city. And I think that responsibility falls to us, that if we think somebody, whether they're from 2 feet outside of the city limits, whether they're from up in northern part of the county, I think that should be our prerogative to decide.
Are you saying that you feel that we should put in that it's required to be a resident, but waivers would be allowed if they are voted on through the council?
Yes.
I mean, it could even be a super majority if we decide to do that. I
Ooh, I
think.
like that idea.
Well, we'd have to run it by Dave Merzig, because I know sometimes it's not allowed, but it's an idea.
If it is allowed, I think it's a good
Yeah,
piece.
because then it very strongly says, like, we think this person is the right person.
well, we have another meeting coming up in a few minutes. Should
Good
we
times.
pick this up at our next meeting? Does anyone want to take a shot at documenting?
I can put something together that we can have a discussion about, a potential motion for us to at least discuss. And if we start from there, if we need to tweak it a little, we can tweak
Sure.
it and then vote on it and then send it to Mr. Merzig for a final cut. And then we can bring that to the council. So at least we have something to work from for the next meeting.
Okay, look forward to that then. We'll have something to talk about to start with next a month from now. I make a move to close.
Second.